Why am I so stressed? Why do I expect myself to have everything figured out? It's like I only just turned 21 earlier this year, and somehow, because I haven't figured out my entire life yet, I feel like I'm falling behind. I feel like a failure. And while I am better at self-empathy some days than I am other days, the overall feeling that I have inside is one of disappointment and dissatisfaction. Not feeling like life is worthwhile, not feeling like I am worthwhile, feeling down, beaten, bruised, burnt out, feeling like a failure. And then I see how I set myself up for failure time and time again with different expectations I set for myself, or how I don't think through something to its full conclusion. And so when something bad happens because of that, I blame myself. It's a vicious cycle of just not being able to take a step back and realize that this is all normal. This is all part of living and growing up, and just because I'm legally fully an adult now at age 21 doesn't mean that I can't go about adulting without a problem, or without discouragement, and without obstacles and impediments and pushback within my own psyche. Because what I'm working with here is only a few years of time where I've really been allowed to figure out who I am and what I believe for myself. Because, when you're a kid and you're taught things and you're told what's true, the cognitive faculties aren't there for you to question that. They're not there for you to be able to think of the bigger picture and to consider all the perspectives. And I don't know if humans are ever capable of truly ever doing that, but when you're a kid and you're still developing the opinions of those around you and the lifestyle of those who you're close with, that just becomes the furniture of the universe. And you don't know that it could be any different. You don't know if it's bad or it just is what it is, and it's real for you. And so I grew up with certain beliefs and a certain worldview that steered me toward a certain way of thinking about everything. And then when I realized through a year of hardship and that the philosophy of life, the religion, wasn't working for me, then I was able to break free from that, sure, but that was just the beginning, and that was just truly the start of my life, and I've had struggle after struggle since then. And sure, I've gotten better each year, and sure, I'm more grown and developed as an individual and able to think more clearly for myself and distance myself from that background, but the unconscious conditioning and implicit psychological influence of that childhood is still informing my decision making and how I interact with the world and how I view myself and my relationship with my family and friends. And it's all connected. It all has its place and position in regard to each other. When people say everything is relative, usually that's taken to mean that there's no absolute truth. Everything happens in relation to other things, and there's no like ultimate reality or truth, or there's no absolute brute fact. But you can also think about the phrase everything is relative in terms of relationships and how everything is connected. There's nothing completely separate from any other thing. There's not only like 6 degrees of separation, there's no separation. If you really get down to the most basic, fundamental level of everything, everything is connected, everything is one. And some people call that oneness after a deity. And they organize systems of belief around it and live their life in accordance to those religious principles. Other times those principles are less religious, but they're still rigid and philosophical. Or maybe they're not so rigid and they're just kind of like on a whim and feeling each situation out as it is. I'm not sure which way is the best way to live. I'm sure it's all circumstantial. After all, everything is relative. But there are like degrees of relationships and relativeness in which some things are closer together than others, it seems, at least from a human perspective. And that's really the only perspective that truly matters to us as humans. Sure, we can try to understand what like a bird's perspective, like a bird's eye view, you know, or what would it like to be a dog and these or a bug, and play with these kind of like perceptual, perspectivist exercises in thought. Those are important. But at the end of the day, on a practical level, on a day-to-day basis, in the everyday trenches of adult human existence, what matters is a human perspective. And one's understanding and relationship with oneself is at the core of that practice. And in order to have such a practice takes time to develop, years and years, decades to become who you are and to figure out what is actually going on in your own mind. How can you separate and distinguish and classify your internal expectations versus the external expectations? What is actually self-imposed versus culturally conditioned? How do you identify yourself amidst all this chaos? How do you make sense of that which does not make sense? And all these problems and dilemmas that come to us at different times in our lives in different ways, but we all have to address them to some extent or another. It's not possible to keep putting them off and procrastinating. I mean, I suppose it is, but that's no way to live. That's just constant avoidance and instant gratification leads to long-term dissatisfaction. And that dissatisfaction won't go away until some real thoughtful and reflective moments and decisions are made. And some things have to change. Everything changes always. But it comes in stages, it comes in waves. And I think the important thing is that through this change and this like fluid fluctuation of life, the best response and the best course of action to take is truly just self-expression. And taking control of one's creative pursuits, not in a judgmental or creative or critical sort of way, but to take control in terms of taking action and to actually put in the time and the effort and the hours and the thought into whatever creative pursuit one deems necessary. And for me, I'm still struggling with that, and I'm not quite fulfilled with that. And I'm pushing myself. I'm trying to make progress, but the progress is slow. And the slow progress is underwhelming, and so I get overwhelmed with emotions, and I'm hard on myself, and I keep pushing and pulling and trying to make something stick and to feel like I'm actually accomplishing something. But the feeling through all of this, the underlying sensation that that underpins my entire existence is one of feeling inadequate. I don't feel good enough. I'm not enough. And I don't know what will be. I don't know what steps I have to take in order to get rid of that feeling. And that's incredibly frustrating because on the one hand, it's an unknown. There's like no clear goal, but it feels like it's not completely out of reach. Like I should be able to get rid of this feeling, and it's hard. It's not something that I can just accept that I'm not good enough, or accept that I'll always feel not good enough. And I can try to acknowledge and let it go, but that only can get me so far. It feels like that's just if it's how it's not like just how I feel, because I've felt it so much that it feels like it's how I am. And there's like an identity piece that requires more effort than just meditation on it. I think that instead of just letting go, I need to work on letting it out, and letting it out through creative practices and finding different cathartic methods of expression to help aid the healing process and to get my feelings and internal struggle and turmoil out of my body and onto the page, or just out into the air, speaking my mind freely and doing so honestly and transparently, and not focusing on whether it's perfect or not, or if it's flawed or not, but focusing on whether it's true for me, and trying to make progress in the way of communication, better communication with myself, better communication with others, and sharing these vulnerable parts of myself with the world, whether that be small scale individual relationships or large scale online platforms. And that's a big step that I know that I've had to take, and know that I will take eventually, and that I know is going to pay off in the long run. But it's such a difficult change to grasp, and there's so much inner resistance to it that I just keep like there's so much pressure put on myself by myself that no matter what I do, I'm never good enough. And that is such an unnecessary but real problem and real habit. And I don't think there's an easy fix for it, because it's become so ingrained in habit. But I know that it's not permanent. I know that there is a way out, and I have a pretty good idea that the only way out is through. through the pain, through the struggle, through the dealing with the feelings directly and not choosing easy distractions over them. The more direct I can be with myself in these feelings and the more open that I can address them, then the sooner I'll be able to get past them and get through them and move on to other endeavors in my life. And sure, I'll meet other problems, and sure, there'll be other obstacles along the way that may even be more difficult. I don't know. But the important thing right now is that what I'm dealing with is normal. What I'm dealing with is part of growing up. What I'm dealing with is human. And anything human is mentionable. And so while it feels like I'm putting myself in a vulnerable position by expressing these ideas, and while it feels like I'm not actually saying anything new, I'm just being derivative and cliche and not actually making any progress, and it's just words. The important thing is that regardless of all this, I have chosen to do this rather than scroll on my phone for a half hour. I've chosen to do this rather than watch TV. I've chosen to do this in spite of my inner critic and resistance to the flow of ideas coming out of me from where I am. And I've put aside time to speak my mind. And what's important is that I tried and that I did it. And that I have a record of it. And that I'll only get better the more I do it. And that this uncomfortableness that I have goes hand in hand with growing and getting more comfortable and seeking new horizons and making more changes and improvements and progress in my life. Because yes, the progress is slow. Yes, it feels like I'm not getting anything done, but over time, through practice, work, and perseverance, the progress is real, it's meaningful change, and it matters because it matters to me. And it's because it matters to me that I care about it, and it's because I care about it that I get anxious about it, because I don't want to do it a wrong way. Even though, in actuality, there is no right or wrong if we're talking pen and paper. There's no right and wrong if we're talking art. There's only